In 1177, 500 Frankish knights faced 26,000 elite Ayyubid warriors, odds of 52 to 1. By sunset, 23,000 Muslim soldiers lay dead, and the entire fate of the Kingdom of Jerusalem hung in the balance. This wasn't just a battle. It was the day a dying teenage king annihilated Saladin's unstoppable invasion in just one brutal afternoon. Picture this. Saladin, the conqueror who had crushed empires, marching with his massive horde, confident, unchallenged. Against him, a leper boy king, Baldwin IV, barely 16, his body ravaged by disease, leading a ragtag force that shouldn't have survived the hour. Yet they didn't just hold. They obliterated 90% of the enemy in a slaughter that defied every military calculation. How could desperation forge such impossible victory? Here's what your history teacher didn't tell you. By the end of this video, you'll understand how Baldwin achieved the impossible. You'll discover 1. The secret relic that made exhausted knights unstoppable angels of death. 2. The tactical flaw that turned Saladin's greatest strength, his vast numbers, into his fatal weakness. 3. The single 30-second decision that rewrote Crusader history forever. 4. Why a diseased teenager became the ultimate weapon against an empire. To understand how Baldwin IV defeated Saladin's empire, we need to go back to the turbulent year of 1177, when the Kingdom of Jerusalem teetered on the brink of annihilation amid the endless Crusades. The Ayyubid Sultanate, under Saladin, was at its apex, controlling vast swaths of Egypt, Syria, and Mesopotamia. A military juggernaut forged from Mamluk slaves turned elite warriors, Arab auxiliaries, and Turkish horsemen. Saladin, the cunning unifier of the Muslim world, had shattered Fatimid rule in Egypt and now eyed the fractured Crusader states as ripe for conquest. In November, he launched a massive invasion from Egypt, crossing into Ascalon with an army that darkened the horizon, intent on looting, enslaving, and besieging his way to Jerusalem itself. His hubris was palpable. Scouts dismissed, forces dispersed for plunder, he mocked the leper king as no threat. Believing the Crusaders too divided and weak to respond, Philip of Flanders had drawn away key allies like the Knights Hospitaller to siege Harim in the north, leaving the south exposed. But facing this onslaught stood Baldwin IV, a dying 16-year-old boy whose body was ravaged by leprosy, skin peeling, limbs numb, vision failing, yet his mind burned with unyielding resolve. Crowned at 13 after his father's death, Baldwin understood that desperation could forge victory from chaos. Barely recovered from malaria, he issued the arriere ban, a frantic call summoning every able-bodied man from Jerusalem's garrisons. With Reynaud of Châtillon, the Ibelin brothers, and a handful of Templars racing from Gaza, he mustered a ragtag force in Ascalon, watching as Saladin's raiders torched villages and chained captives. If Ascalon fell, or if Saladin reached Ramla unchecked, the gates of Jerusalem would swing open, demolishing the Kingdom of Jerusalem, dooming Christian Europe's foothold in the Holy Land, and paving the way for Ayyubid dominion from Cairo to Damascus. Vienna, Rome, Paris, all would feel the ripple as the Crusades collapsed into oblivion. Baldwin's only hope lay in a daring breakout along the coast, chasing shadows toward Montgisard, where fate would pivot on a single, impossible charge. The Saladin force defied comprehension. At its core marched 8,000 Mamluks, elite slave soldiers forged in Egyptian barracks, masters of the saddle and sword, unflinching in their devotion to the Sultan. Flanking them were 10,000 Turkish horse archers, swift as desert winds. Their composite bows capable of unleashing volleys that darkened the sky and pierced Frankish mail from afar. Behind lumbered 8,000 Arab infantry and Bedouin scouts, supported by siege engines and a sprawling baggage train heavy with looted treasures, tents, camels, and supplies stretching miles. This was no mere raiding party. It was an invasion machine, designed for encirclement, attrition, and overwhelming firepower that made rigid Crusader lines obsolete. Saladin's mobility turned battlefields into killing grounds, where numbers alone could suffocate any foe. Against this stood Baldwin IV's paltry 500 men, 375 feudal knights scraped from Jerusalem's garrisons and baronies, plus 80 Templars sworn to poverty and death. No grand infantry phalanx, no archer brigades, just a thin line of heavy cavalry. Their horses foam-flecked from the frantic ride south, riders bandaged and feverish, armored in chainmail hauberks and conical helms. Lances, broadswords, and maces were their tools, but their greatest strength was unyielding discipline and the sacred relic of the true cross, borne by Bishop Odo of Bayeux to ignite divine resolve. They had trained relentlessly in the Frankish charge, a devastating, iron-clad wedge that could punch through chaos like a battering ram. The geography itself favored Saladin. The dusty plains and marshy wadis near Montgisard were perfect for his hit-and-run tactics, allowing horse archers to harass from distance while infantry pinned the enemy. Hilly rises offered vantage for ambushes, and the open terrain amplified his numerical swarm, turning any stand into a suicide. Baldwin's knights, weighted by armor, risked bogging down in soft ground, their lances useless against evasive riders. But the young king saw what others missed, Saladin's arrogance and predictability. With his horde, fractured into raiding bands, scattered from Gaza to Ramla, drunk on easy plunder, the Sultan's greatest strength became his fatal weakness, a disorganized sprawl vulnerable to a single, thunderous strike. This mismatch wasn't warfare. It was mathematical impossibility, where 52-1 odds mocked every tactical treatise, and only desperation could bridge the abyss. Late morning on November 25th brought the first glimpse of chaos. Saladin's vast horde, bloated with plunder and slaves from torched villages, sprawled across the marshy plains near Montgisard like a serpent uncoiling, tents pitched haphazardly, Mamluks lounging by campfires. Turkish archers scouting lazily while the baggage train bogged down at a swollen river crossing. The Sultan, confident in his scouts' silence, had dismissed any Frankish threat, allowing his men to forage freely. But here's what Saladin missed. Baldwin's knights, having slipped undetected from Ascalon via the coastal road, crested a low ridge, the true cross gleaming atop its pole like a beacon of divine fury. Instead of retreating to Jerusalem as expected, the leper king pressed forward, his bandaged hands gripping the reins, despite the agony. The Crusaders, exhausted from the night march, armor caked in dust, formed a tight wedge, lances lowered, hearts pounding with desperation. Saladin's nephew, Taqi al-Din Umar, spotted the approaching dust cloud first and barked orders to rally the Mamluks, but the army's sprawl turned coordination into nightmare. Noon came the first clash. Taqi al-Din's elite guard, some 5,000 strong, surged forward with curved blades flashing, aiming to envelop the tiny Frankish line like a tidal wave crashing over rocks. Arrows whistled from Turkish bows, darkening the sky and thudding into shields, felling a handful of Turcopoles on the flanks. The Crusaders bent under the barrage, infantry spearmen bracing as Mamluk horsemen hammered their center. Reynald de Chatillon roared commands, his axe cleaving through the first wave, but the odds mocked them. Waves of Ayyubid infantry pouring in, their sheer numbers threatening to suffocate the knights. But then something defied all military logic. Baldwin, his face veiled against the leprosy's scars, dismounted amid the fray and knelt before the true cross, carried by Bishop Odo. With hands raw and weeping, he prayed aloud, tears streaming, "Lord, if I am to die, let it be in victory." His men, inspired by this diseased teenager's unyielding faith, erupted in cheers. This was the secret relic that made exhausted knights unstoppable angels of death, infusing them with a supernatural resolve that turned fear into frenzy. Early afternoon brought the moment of crisis. Saladin, mounting his camel amid the panic, tried to reform his lines, but his vast numbers, his greatest strength, became his fatal weakness. Scattered raiders too dispersed to consolidate, mired in mud from recent rains. Baldwin saw the fracture, a gap in the Mamluk center where Taqi al-Din's son, Ahmad, fell pierced by a Templar lance, shattering morale. The king raised his sword, bandages unraveling, and shouted the single command that changed history: "Charge for God and Jerusalem." In that 30-second decision, the Frankish wedge exploded forward, heavy cavalry thundering like an iron avalanche, lances splintering shields and skewering riders. Instead of holding, Saladin's troops dissolved. The Templars, sworn to die before retreat, hacked through the core like devils incarnate, their white mantles stained crimson. Mamluks trampled their own in the rout, arrows abandoned as panic spread like wildfire. Baldwin, remounted despite his frailty, pursued relentlessly, his leadership proving why a diseased teenager became the ultimate weapon against an empire, his spirit outweighing his body's decay, forging unity from despair. Late afternoon, the climax unfolded. Saladin watched his army evaporate, his Mamluk guard cut down around him. Rather than rallying, the Sultan fled on his racing camel, a mere handful of bodyguards shielding him as the entire Ayyubid force became a mob, fleeing southward through choking dust and blood-soaked marshes. The Crusaders harried them for miles, broadswords rising and falling in merciless rhythm until exhaustion and nightfall halted the slaughter. The ground was carpeted with the dead, marshes choked with bodies as far as the eye could see. 23,000 Ayyubid warriors lay slaughtered against just 90 Crusader losses. The kill ratio, 256 to 1, defied military logic, a testament to how Saladin's vast numbers, his greatest strength, became his fatal weakness in the scattered chaos. The Sultan's significant treasure, his entire baggage train, laden with gold, weapons and captives, was captured, including tents pitched for a triumphant siege that never came. This was the payoff. The true cross, that secret relic, transforming exhausted knights into unstoppable angels of death. Baldwin's 30-second decision to charge rewriting Crusader history forever. But victory came at a price. Baldwin IV collapsed from exhaustion, his leprosy-ravaged body finally betraying him amid the blood-soaked field, hands too numb to grip his sword. The first messengers to reach Jerusalem reported total disaster, because fleeing Ayyubid survivors spread tales of Frankish annihilation to cover their shame, until the king's triumphant return shattered the lie. The battle marked history's hinge. Saladin's Ayyubid expansion into the Kingdom of Jerusalem ended forever in that form. His dreams of swift conquest shattered, forcing a 2-year rebuild of his shattered army before he could strike again. The Frankish heavy cavalry charge, amplified by religious fervor and surprise, revolutionized Crusader tactics for decades, emphasizing mobility and morale over static defense in the volatile Holy Land. Philosophical insight. This battle proved that faith and courage weigh more than numbers, that individual genius can override calculation when forged in desperation. Modern military academies still study Montgisard as a blueprint for asymmetric warfare, where a tiny, resolute force exploits an overconfident giant's dispersal. When ordinary people, led by a diseased boy king, stand together against annihilation, they become extraordinary, reminding us that the human spirit is the ultimate weapon against empires. Returning to our opening paradox, 52 to 1 odds became history. Now you understand how Baldwin IV crushed Saladin's empire. They proved that faith and courage weigh more than numbers, that the human spirit is the ultimate weapon against overwhelming force. If you were riveted by this untold story of tactical genius and divine resolve, hit that like button and subscribe to Ancient Valor for more epic tales of impossible victories from history's bloodiest fields.